The music was still playing when the knives went in. Pipes and fiddles, a drum somewhere, the rough-voiced singer trying to pull the room back to mirth with a bawdy song about a maiden and a miller's son. Robb heard it all as if from behind a door, every note distant and wrong. The taste of salt beef and watered wine sat heavy on his tongue. His hand was wrapped around the stem of a goblet, the other resting on the table near where his crown lay, a circle of bronze and iron worked into snarling wolves. He had never liked this hall. Too low, too damp. The stones sweated and the air stank of stale meat and wet wool. Walder Frye had filled it with banners and food and his sour false smiles. But the twins still felt like a chokehold on the river, nothing more. Caitlin sat beside him, pale beneath her auburn hair, fingers worrying the edge of her sleeve. Her eyes did not leave Lord Walder's face, as if she could catch the lie before it struck. Grey Wind was locked outside, barred from him by insult and courtesy in equal measure. That gnawed at him more than the lack of decent wine. "It'll be over soon," he had told his mother earlier, quietly, when Merritt Fry and Edwin Fry came to lead them to table. "We eat, we drink, we smile. The phrase will grumble for 10 years, but they'll have their place. Then we march for home. Home. Winterfell." He could see it if he closed his eyes, black stone and gray, the hot breath of the godswood, snow drifting in the courtyards, Bran and Rickon running with little wooden swords in hand. He could see the look on his father's face when the first shriek cut through the music like an axe. The second followed an eye blink later, ragged and wet. Bowstrings thrummed above them from the gallery. Steel rang. Someone laughed. Robb did not move until he saw the first arrow. It came down like a black blur and took his bannerman in the throat. Ser Wendell Manderly, big and soft from eating too much fish pie, made a sound like a broken bell and pitched forward into his trencher. Blood jetted across the table, splattering Robb's sleeve. The dubiously cooked capon slid to the floor along with Wendell, the plate shattering. Robb's chair scraped stone as he surged to his feet. For a heartbeat he stood stupidly, looking up, seeing crossbows and quarrels. The Fry men there in their pale gray and blue, their faces red with wine and hateful glee. A third arrow slammed into his shoulder. The force of it spun him half around. "Robb!" Caitlin was on her feet, reaching for him, then reaching for a knife that wasn't there. There were no swords. A wedding feast, Robb thought stupidly. Guessed right. We shared their bread and salt. The arrows kept falling. He heard the splinter of wood as Great John Umber overturned a table with a roar, using it as a shield. Men he knew went down like wheat under a scythe. A serving girl screamed until a quarrel punched through her teeth and left a red ruin at the back of her head. Somewhere the singer's voice cut off mid-note. Grey Wind, Robb thought, and the word was a howl in his skull. Grey Wind, Grey Wind. He could smell his direwolf suddenly, the musk of fur and earth, the iron tang of old blood on fangs. Outside, locked away, Walder Frye was still seated at the head of the hall. He hadn't moved. His wrinkled lips were twisted in something that might have been a smile if he'd ever had warmth in him. Beside him, one of his grandsons lifted a horn and blew 3 harsh notes. The doors crashed open. Fry men-at-arms poured into the hall from both ends, swords drawn. They wore no sigils, only rough leather and mail. One in a half-helm streaked with rust leapt onto the table, trampling plates and goblets underfoot. He swung his sword down and split Ser Reynold Westerling's skull like a ripe melon. Robb's legs felt heavy. He reached for his sword, found nothing. The weight of steel at his hip had been taken from him at the door. Stark fool. Something whispered within him in his father's voice. You trusted guessed right with a man who never kept his word a day in his life. Another quarrel hammered into his back. He tried to draw breath and the air went sour in his lungs. He saw his bannermen die. Small John Umber, bellowing, took 3 men with him before they hamstrung him and hacked him down. Galbart Glover fell with his hands around a Frey's throat. Fingers dug in so deep they had to break them to pry the corpse loose. The great John himself vanished beneath a knot of men. Robb heard him laughing, still laughing, even as blades rose and fell. Caitlin screamed, a raw, tearing sound. She lunged across the table and seized Walder Frey's crutch of a grandson, Jingle Bell, with his fool's bells and simple smile. Her knife was in her hand now. Had she hidden it in her sleeve? Robb barely remembered. She pressed it to the boy's throat and drew blood. "We gave you bread and salt," she rasped. Her voice trembled. "We honored you. Let him go. Let my son go and I'll—" "Mother," Robb tried to say, but the word turned to blood on his lips. Walder Frey's gaze slid to him at last. His eyes were tiny black stones sunk in wrinkled flesh. "The king in the north," he croaked. "Betrayer of oaths. What good's a king who cannot keep his word? Only a fool would follow such a one." He nodded to someone Robb could not see. The man who stepped out from behind the dais wore mail and a damp white cloak with red rust blossoms at the hem. His face was pale and expressionless, his eyes gray and cold as a winter river. Roose Bolton's hand moved faster than Robb would ever have believed that hand could move. The dagger slid beneath Robb's ribs, up and in, seeking the heart. For a moment there was only a surprising coldness. Then the pain came, vast and choking, like a beast sinking claws into his chest. "Jaime Lannister sends his regards," Roose murmured. Robb's knees buckled. He grabbed at the dagger hilt without meaning to, fingers closing on rough-wrapped Leather. Are warm with his own blood. Roose stepped back, letting the blade slide free. Blood sheeted down Robb's doublet, darkening the direwolf stitched there until it seemed to howl. He fell. The stone rushed up to meet him, hard and unyielding. His crown clattered from the table and rolled, spinning lazy circles, then came to rest against his cheek. He could feel the bite of its metal against his skin. Mother was still screaming. She dragged the knife across Jingle Bell's throat. Blood sprayed in an arc. The boy gargled, bells jingling madly as he flailed. Walder Frey didn't flinch. He only watched like a man watching a fly hit cobweb. "Robb," Caitlin sobbed. Her voice came from a long way away now. "Robb, Robb." He tried to turn his head. His body refused. His limbs were lead. The candlelight blurred, doubling and tripling, each flame smearing into a streak. Gray wind, he thought again, but the thought was thin. Everything narrowed to the taste of iron in his mouth and the weight of the cold hall pressing down. He heard the direwolf's distant howl, furious, wild, cut off by a dozen crossbow bolts. Something inside him tore. The world went white. Not the white of snow or bone, but something vaster, emptier. A space without sound, without breath, without pain. For a heartbeat, he hung there, suspended between the last thud of his heart and the nothing beyond. He was a boy again, chasing Bran across the battlements, laughing as they slipped on ice. He was riding beside his father, the wind hard in his face, the sound of hounds baying in the distance. He was kissing Jane in a darkened room, the taste of wine and tears on her lips. He was looking at a man with his father's face and sword but not his honor, ugly yellow hair gleaming in the sun atop a King's Landing scaffold. All of it, all at once, collapsing inward. Then, through the white, came the trees. They rose like red pillars from the blankness, their trunks glossy as wet flesh, roots twisted in endless patterns, nodding and unnodding beneath him. Leaves whispered overhead in a wind he could not feel. Faces stared from the bark, pale as bone, their eyes dark hollows that wept sap the color of fresh blood. The weirwoods, he thought dimly, the old gods, but he had never seen this place. This was no single god's wood. It was every god's wood. A forest without end, a tangle of heart trees bound together across distance and time. He drifted between them, weightless as breath. When he turned his head, he saw himself. Robb Stark lay on the hall floor, spread-eagled, eyes half open. His face was slack, as if the muscles had forgotten how to hold an expression. Blood pooled around him, seeping into the cracks between stones. Walder Frey was speaking. His mother was on her knees, hair loose, fingers dug into her own face as she screamed. Men dragged her away. Someone took up his fallen crown. He tried to reach for his body. No use. He had no hands, no arms. He was a thought, a thread of smoke. Panic surged through him, a savage urge to bite and struggle and kick. The feeling did not fit the empty white place or the red forest. It was an animal thing. He clutched at it because it was his. "Gray wind," he whispered without a mouth. Then he was elsewhere. The world slammed into him with a rush of scent and sound so overpowering, he almost fled back into the blankness. Hot blood, old meat, damp earth, the bitter musk of fear, men shouting, the twang of bowstrings, the reek of horses and piss and smoke. He saw through yellow eyes. The courtyard outside the twins boiled with men. Fry guards lined the walls, their crossbows raised. A dozen were already loosing quarrels into the great gray wolf that tore through them like a storm-given flesh. Gray wind moved with a grace that made Robb ache. Each leap was clean, each twist precise, a dance of fang and claw. A Fry raised his spear. Gray wind caught the shaft in his jaws and wrenched it aside, snapping it like kindling, then lunged for the man's throat. Warm blood flooded his mouth. Robb tasted it, copper bright, and wanted more. Get out, he thought wildly, pushing at the wolf's muscles with a mind that did not belong here. Run, run, boy, go. Gray wind snarled, snapping at a man who jabbed from behind. An arrow glanced off his flank. Another buried itself in his haunch. Pain flared hot, then faded into a distant ache. There were too many of them. They had penned him between burning wagons and men with pikes. Never mind how many he tore down. He leapt. A quarrel caught him in the belly mid-spring. His legs spasmed. He hit the cobbles hard enough to see stars. More bolts hammered in, which shivered against bone. Warmth spilled out of him in great gouts. No, Robb thought. No. Gray wind dragged himself forward, leaving a smear of red. The nearest Fry flinched despite himself. The wolf lowered his head, baring his teeth in a soundless snarl. His tongue lolled, pink and stupid with exhaustion. Robb felt the life going out of him. A boot crashed into Gray Wind's ribs. He would have snapped at it, but he had no strength left. The archers closed in, their faces white beneath their helms. One raised his crossbow, leveled it at Gray Wind's eye, and pulled the trigger. The world exploded into black. In the red forest, Robb howled. The sound shook the leaves, though he had no throat to make it. The weirwood faces stirred. Sap tears welled thicker. No, he snarled or thought. No, I won't. He was mine. That was my wolf. My! The word brother floated to the surface and broke. Wolf and boy, they had been that together. They had been something more, though he'd never put a name to it. When Gray Wind had hunted, a part of Robb had run with him. When the wolf slept at the foot of his bed, Robb's dreams had been filled with snow and moonlight. Now both lay dead, one in a human hall, one in a human yard. You are not done. The voice came from everywhere at once and nowhere in Particu. Lar. It was deep and slow, like roots pushing aside stone. It was not one voice but many, layered and tangled. The murmur of leaves, the crack of ice, the distant cry of wolves on a winter night. Robb turned or tried to toward it. The forest shifted with him, trunks and branches rearranging until a single tree loomed before him more immense than any other. His face was older. The eyes carved into its bark seemed bottomless, and when its sap tears fell, they smoked where they hit the ground. Who are you? He demanded, or thought he did. It was hard to be sure in this place. We are what was here before your father's fathers were thought of. We are what remembers. We are the watchers in the wood. We are the old gods, stark. The sap dripped in slow, viscous beads. Each drop held a reflection. In one, Robb saw a child in furs, chasing a girl with auburn hair through snow. His mother as a girl, tackling her brother in the gods would below Riverrun. In another, he saw his father, younger, kneeling before a heart tree with a sword across his knees. He saw himself, too, riding out of Winterfell with banners snapping behind him, Gray Wind loping at his stirrup. He saw the trident, Lord Hoster's halls, the crushing weight of a crown he had never wanted and had never dared lay down. "You watched," Robb said, something thick in his chest that wasn't quite sorrow or rage. "All of it. You watched me fall. You watched them butcher my men. You watched my father die. We see many things," the many-voiced whisper sighed. "We do not reach. We are what is. We are the stillness beneath the snow. We do not change the course of men." "Then leave me be," Robb spat or tried to. "Let me go. Let me be with gray wind. Be nothing. Rest. We cannot. Something has taken root that was not meant to. You went where you should not." Images flickered, gray wind snarling as bolts hammered into him. The white emptiness Robb had hung in. The moment when his desperate thought had leapt from his fading body to the wolf. A thread of himself had followed his direwolf into that last, frantic charge. "You are not the first of your blood to wear two skins," the voice went on. "But you are not trained. Clumsy. You tore at the weave." And another hand moved. Flame blazed in his mind's eye, not the red of ordinary fire, but a hot, hungry orange shot through with tongues of blue. In it, a man with a ragged beard and a patch over one eye pressed his lips to a woman's mouth, breathing life into her drowned lungs. Her hair spread in the water like weeds. Her skin was swollen and gray. "Mother," Robb thought, shocked. The hound's muttered tale came back to him. Catelyn Stark's body thrown from the twins into the river. Wounds along her face and throat. A river that carried corpses downstream. "You had died," the voice whispered. "Your wolf had died. That should have been the end." But the fire god's servants called another back. They woke one corpse from the river, and in the waking, something tore. "Your blood calls to our roots, Stark." Her blood called to us too. For a moment, between breaths, there was a path. Robb saw it then, the instant where the kiss of life bridged flesh and spirit. A ragged, half-burnt man named Beric Dondarrion bent over Catelyn Stark. As fire kissed her, the weirwood stirred. The forest of red faces shivered. A gap opened between waking and dying. Through it, a wolf's fading soul and a boy's shredded spirit and a mother's drowned rage tangled. "You are bound," the old gods whispered, "to flesh that is not wholly yours, to a beast that is no longer alive, to roots that drink the blood of oaths and spilling men. Half life, half death. We cannot untangle you now without tearing more holes." "Then why bring me here?" Robb demanded. "To show me what I have lost? To offer terms?" The forest went very still. Even the imagined wind seemed to hold its breath. "You were a king. Men named you so in their hearts before they named you with their tongues. You marched beneath your direwolf banners and made oaths in our sight. You broke one oath and kept others. You died for it. That is as it is. Yet the North remembers you. Your name whispers on the wind in Winterfell's empty halls and in the crofts of men who bent the knee and men who did not. We are not blind to the shape of things." Images tumbled over each other, not in a line but all at once. Winterfell in ruins, its tower blackened and gutted, snow drifting through broken windows. A flayed man banner flying where the direwolf once ran proud. Men with pale eyes and pale hair, Boltons, taking their ease by Ned Stark's old hearth. Fry men riding through white fields, laughing as they emptied larders. Little girls forced to curtsy to strangers wearing wolf pelts as cloaks. The wall, tall and cold, with a darkness stirring beyond it. The cold is coming, Stark. Not the cold of one unhappy winter or two. The deep cold, the long night. It stirs beyond the wall, and men are not ready. Wolves will fare better than sheep, but even wolves will fall unless someone stands. "Someone," Robb said bitterly. "Who isn't me? I'm dead. Not holy." There was something almost like humor in the rustle of the leaves. "You cling. You pulled your spirit into the wolf. When he died, you scrabbled at the nearest root. You are stubborn. We remember stubborn men. Your father, your Uncle Brandon, the old kings of winter who knelt to no one." A drop of sap fell from the great heart tree's eye and landed at Robb's feet. Where it struck the white nothingness, Roots leapt up, twining into the shape of a man made of bark and bone and shadow. You are dead enough that you can never be what you were. You are alive enough that you cannot drift away. So we make you an offer, Wolf King. Take back a body, take back a name, take back your war. The Barkman lifted its head. Its features were his and not his. His hair was like a bramble thicket of roots. Antlers of bone and wood jutted from its brow in an echo of a crown. Its eyes were gray, not entirely though. Flecks of gold glimmered in them. Wolf yellow, bright and feral. At what price? Robb asked quietly. All good bargains have a cost. You will not be what you were. You will make our justice as much as your own. You will be king over more than men if you choose it. Over wolves. Over shadows in the trees. The North will be your pack. Their wrongs will howl in your blood. You will not rest easy. You will not die easily. You will be bound to us until your war is done. He thought of his father, kneeling by a heart tree with ice laid across his knees. Ned Stark had believed in justice, not vengeance. He had believed in keeping one's word, even when it hurt. Robb had tried, but he had failed. He had broken a marriage pact for love, and his men had paid. Will this curse, he asked, tasting the word, make me like them? Like Walder Frey and Roose Bolton? A butcher? A monster? You will be what you are, the voice rustled. Only more so. Wolves do not often lie, but wolves kill. He saw Freys dangling from trees, their tongues black, their faces swollen. He saw Boltons flayed as they had flayed others, their screams thin beneath the patient whisper of the leaves. He saw his own hands bloody. He saw the fear in the eyes of men who had once cheered his name, now shrinking back from whatever he'd become. The North remembers, the old gods said. Will you? Robb hesitated. The white emptiness pressed close. Somewhere within it, he could feel the faint echo of his direwolf's presence. Gray wind, not gone entirely, but scattered fragments of scent and instinct lodged in roots and soil. Somewhere else, colder. A knot of rage burned in the dark. His mother's second life, twisted by a fire god he did not know. He could let go. There would be peace in that, perhaps. No more crowns. No more choices. But then he saw Winterfell again. He saw Bran and Rickon running with their little wooden swords. He saw Arya balancing on one foot on the edge of a wall, arms spread wide. He saw Sansa singing in the Godswood, her hands folded, her eyes closed. He saw a flayed man banner flying where the Direwolf had flown. Robb Stark had failed to keep his house whole once already. To drift now, to leave the North to Boltons and Freys and Lannisters and worse things from the cold, felt like failing them all over again. He was a Stark of Winterfell. When the snows fell and the white winds blew, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. His father had said that once, the night before he rode south. Will I be able to save them? Robb asked. Silence. You will be able to try, the old god said at last. No more than that. We are not the fire god with his pretty lies. We do not promise victories. We promise winters. Robb thought of Grey Wind's last stand. The wolf had not run, though every instinct would have told him to. He had lunged at the nearest throat even as the bolts went in. That was all. Teeth and courage to the bitter end. Then do it, Robb said. Bind me, curse me, whatever you call it. Give me back a body and I will fight. The red leaves shivered. Sap tears fell in a slow rain. The roots at his feet surged up around him, twining like serpents. For a moment he knew terror, a child's blind fear of the dark beneath the bed. You will be ours, the old gods murmured, their voices soft and implacable. Wolf and king, Fong and crown, we will ride your rage and you will ride our roots. Remember, Stark, every kill feeds the trees. I remember, Robb whispered, though his voice was only a thought. By ice and by blood. I remember. The roots closed over him. He fell again, but this time there was no hall, no music, no stone. Only the sensation of being drawn down, down, down through earth and root and groundwater, through ice and shale and the bones of ancient beasts. He glimpsed the world as the trees saw it. Slow, vast, nearly unchanging. Seasons wheeled like birds. Empires rose and fell. Men prowled like insects, bright and brief. He felt wolves running in the snows of 1,000 winters. He felt their hunger, their joy, their simple, perfect immediacy. He felt every deer they brought down, every pup they licked clean, every time they lifted their muzzles to sing the moon's cold song. He felt something colder, older, stirring far to the north, beyond even the wall. The trees shuddered away from it. Their roots did not reach so far. That land belonged to another kind of god. Then, with a wrench that tore a wordless cry from him, he was forced upward. He rose through another trunk, this one younger, its face half-formed. He felt the sap racing in its veins. He tasted snow on its leaves. His awareness surged up into branches, then spilled out into the air above a forest of black-green pines and snow-laden oaks. For a heartbeat he hovered, disembodied, feeling the wind. Then the roots reached for older stuff. There had been bones buried here once. They had sunk into the soil long and long ago, flesh rotting away, leaving only white splinters. Someone had made a cairn, stones, offerings. Perhaps a stark dead in battle, carried home to lie beneath the watching eyes of the old gods. Now the roots found them. They twisted around the bones like eager fingers. They drank the marrow still clinging there in memory and time. Wood hardened into something like bone. Bone softened into something like wood. A rib here, a femur there, a spine vertebrae formed anew, drawn up by the roots into the shape of a man. Snow fell, hissing softly. The tree's shadow lengthened, though the sun was behind clouds. The first breath hit his lungs like a blow. Robb Stark jerked upright, clutching at the air with hands that had not existed an instant before. He choked, coughed, spat a clot of dark, thick sap that steamed where it hit the snow. His chest heaved. Cold tore down his throat. His fingers dug into frozen earth until his nails, black, thick, almost like small claws, bit it. Rough it. He lay at the base of a heart tree. It was smaller than the one in his vision, younger, but its face was carved all the same, its eyes bleeding sap. The snow beneath its roots was stained in old patterns, half-covered. His body trembled, not from cold. Cold barely touched him. He could feel it vaguely in the way he might notice a change in the light, but it didn't cut the way it once had. His skin was pale, too pale, shot through with faint threads darker than veins. When he flexed his fingers, he saw the faint ridges of something like bark along the backs of his hands. He lifted a shaking hand to his face. Stubble rasped under his fingers, coarse, thicker than he remembered. His cheekbones felt sharper. His teeth, when he ran his tongue across them, were still mostly human, but his canines pressed a little too long against his lip. Most alarming were his eyes. He could not see them, but he felt them. Felt how they caught the light, how they focused. The world was too bright, too sharp. He could see every grain of bark in the heart tree, every individual flake of snow as it drifted down. He could see the tremble of a squirrel's whiskers 50 yards away. He could hear its heart beating. He rolled onto his side and retched again, though there was nothing left in him. Sap dribbled from his lips. When he pushed himself to his knees, the snow crunched beneath him and melted where his bare skin touched it, steaming slightly. He was naked. That fact came late, almost as an afterthought. His body should have been shivering, his teeth chattering. Instead, the cold felt right, welcome. The air smelt of pine and distant wood smoke and something else. Men, horses, steel. Far off, but closer than it should have been. Robb pushed himself to his feet. His legs held. He leaned one hand against the heart tree, panting. The carved face watched him without comment, sap tears glistening. "What have you done to me?" he rasped. The wind whispered through the branches. Snow hissed down. He felt something twist in his chest. A tug, as if invisible threads bound him to the tree, to something deep beneath its roots. Under his skin, a faint pattern of knots and whirls pulsed in time to his heart. "You took the bargain," The whisper came from his bones as much as from the branches. We honored it. He laughed, abrupt and bitter. The sound came out rough, edged with a hint of growl. Robb Stark, king in the north, stood beneath the boughs of a heart tree in some nameless corner of the Wolfswood, naked, half-frozen, and very likely mad. Mad men did not smell the world like this, did they? The scent of men drew his head around before he had decided to move. He lifted his face, nostrils flaring. The wind brought him sweat and horse, leather and oil. Somewhere a man had been eating onions. Another stank of fear, old and sour. For men. No, 5. One smaller, younger, breathing faster. They were not close yet, but they were coming closer. He could hear the jingle of harness, the creak of leather. Wolves too. 3 of them, lean and shaggy. Not as big as Grey Wind had been. Ordinary wolves, yellow-eyed and wary. His heart clenched. Grey Wind. The ache of that loss was still raw, a hollow place in his chest. Yet when he closed his eyes, he felt something like his wolf's presence. Faint but there, threaded through the roots and the snow and the air. Not one thing but many scattered. "We will be king over more than men," he whispered, remembering the old god's words. He did not know if he spoke to himself or the tree. The wolves came first. They emerged from the trees in a loose triangle, moving with that same eerie grace Grey Wind had had, though smaller. Their tongues lolled slightly. Their fur was mottled gray and white and brown. One had a torn ear. Another limped faintly on his right hind leg, an old wound never quite healed. They stopped when they saw him. Their ears flicked, their hackles rose, but they did not bolt. They stood, nostrils quivering, tasting his scent. He tasted theirs. Once, he would have needed to warg into Grey Wind to feel the world like this. Now the line between his own senses and the wolves was thin. He could feel the texture of the snow under pads instead of feet, smell the faint, enticing musk of rabbits buried under drifts yards away. He could hear the men on horses crashing clumsily through the underbrush, talking too loudly. Without thinking, he bared his teeth. The wolves' tails lifted, not in aggression, in acknowledgement. Something inside him shifted, like a man stepping into boots that fit too well. He reached out. Not in the clumsy, desperate way he'd once tried to reach for Grey Wind in dreams, but with something deeper, an instinct that came as naturally as breathing. Come, he thought. The wolves moved forward as one and sank to their bellies before him. The smell of men was very close now. Robb could hear their words. "Told you there's something wrong with that tree," one man was saying, his voice high with nerves. "Old Nan said." "Old Nan's not here," another snapped. He sounded older, more tired. "Lord Bolton wants this bit of wood watched, so we watch it. You want to tell him you'd rather be sitting soft in the Dreadfort while Stannis marches." "Laugh all you want," a third muttered. "I heard a howl last night like—" The horses snorted. Hoofs crunched. The 5 men rode into the clearing with the heart tree at its center, trotting their mounts in a semicircle. For war, the flayed man of Bolton on their cloaks. The 5th had no sigil, only a patched leather jerkin, but he carried himself with the easy arrogance of someone who thought a sword made him a lord. They reined in as one. The first thing they saw was the wolves. 3 of them lying in the snow, watching. One lifted his head and licked his chops. The second thing they saw was the man standing naked beneath the heart tree, with a face they all knew from descriptions ND songs, and eyes that glinted like a wolf's behind them. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The young one gasped. "Bloody hells," he whispered. "It's him." "Shut your mouth," the older soldier snapped, but his own hand had drifted to the hilt of his sword. The flayed man banners fluttered behind them in the cold wind, a smear of red against the gray. Robb did not move. He stood with one hand resting against the heart tree's trunk, feeling the slow, steady thrum of sap beneath bark. The wolves' breaths puffed white in the air at his feet. He knew what he must look like. His hair hung in wild, curling tangles to his shoulders. Sap and dried blood streaked his skin. The only color on him was the faint flush at his cheeks and the dark, whorl-like marks on his arms, like knots in old wood. He felt no shame at his nakedness. Wolves did not trouble themselves about clothes. Men did. "Who are you?" the leader demanded at last, trying for bluster. "What are you doing at the heart tree, wildling?" Robb tilted his head. The sound of the man's voice sent a ripple of irritation through him. His nostrils flared. The man's fear sharpened. "Who do you think I am?" Robb asked softly. His voice was rougher than it had been in life, deeper, with a rasp at the edges, as if he'd been screaming for hours. The words came more easily than he had feared, though. Whatever else had changed, he could still speak. The young soldier swallowed hard. "My lord," he stammered. My king. He's dead?" The older sneered, but his eyes darted to the heart tree. The carved face wept sap steadily, dark trails down white bark. "Old gods be damned. The young wolf's bones were where?" Robb asked quietly. He stepped forward. The wolves rose with him, moving in perfect unison. All 5 horses shied. One reared, nearly pitching its rider into the snow. The man cursed, hauling on the reins. "Steady, damn you," he barked. "It's some trick." Bolton said the Starks try tricks. Some mummers show, or... Robb moved again, faster than he meant to. One heartbeat he stood beneath the tree. The next he was at the nearest horse's flank, close enough to lay a hand on its sweaty neck. The beast shuddered, eyes rolling. The soldier on its back stared down at him, eyes wide, his face leached of color. "Do I look like a mummer to you?" Robb asked. His hand shot up. Fingers closed around the man's ankle like an iron band. He yanked. The man came off his horse with a startled cry, slamming into the snow on his back. The breath whooshed out of him. His sword went flying. Robb put a foot on his chest before he could scramble up. "Who do you serve?" he asked. "B. Bolton," the man gasped. "Lord Roose Bolton, Warden o' the North." The title was a spark in dry tinder. Roose. Roose with his pale eyes and damp cloak and cold hands. Roose standing in Walder Frey's hall, dagger in hand. Roose's voice speaking Jaime Lannister's name as he slid steel into Robb's heart. Heat rushed through him from soles to scalp. His fingers curled. The man beneath his foot wheezed. Blood dribbled from the corner of his mouth, bright against the snow. "You will make our justice," the old gods had said. Their voices rustled inside his skull. Grey Wind's memories surged in him again. Men with Frey sigils firing crossbows into his flesh, jeering as they did it. Rage like that wolf's rage filled him. The world narrowed to the man beneath him and the flayed man on his cloak. He did not mean to kill him. He meant only to lean, to press, to remind the man what weight felt like. But his strength was not human any longer. Bone crunched under his bare heel. The man's ribs gave way with a wet crack. His eyes bulged. Robb snatched his foot back in horror. It was too late. The man convulsed once, twice, then lay still, mouth open in a voiceless scream. His chest caved in like rotten wood. The young soldier made a strangled sound. The others tore their swords free of their scabbards, the rasp of steel loud in the clearing. "Witchcraft," one hissed. "7 save us." Robb stared down at the corpse he'd made. There was no satisfaction in it, only a cold, hollow echo where his heartbeat should have raced. His hands trembled. The wolves did not tremble. They flowed around him, placing themselves between him and the horses, fur bristling. Their lips peeled back from long white fangs. Robb lifted his head. "You serve the Boltons," he said. His voice carried, low but heavy. "You wear the flayed man in my father's lands. You watch my father's trees." He stepped forward. The wolves paced him. "Tell Roose Bolton," he went on, "that the king in the north remembers. Tell him the boy he killed for a lion's thanks is walking his woods. Tell him I am coming home." The leader swallowed. "You expect us to believe." Robb moved again. The world blurred. One heartbeat he stood 10 paces away. The next he was nose to nose with the man. His hand wrapped around the man's sword blade. The steel bit into his palm, blood welling in thin lines, but he barely felt it. Gray eyes met gray. For a moment the clearing held its breath. "They called me the young wolf," Robb murmured. "They sang about how I never lost a battle. I lost a war. I know that. But I will not lose my home." He squeezed. The sword snapped between his fingers, the broken half falling into the snow. The man's bowels let go. The smell was sharp and sour. His hands shook around the ruined hilt. "You'll ride," Robb said. "All of you. Now, tell him what you saw. If you lie, I'll know. If you say nothing," his smile bared too many teeth, "I'll know that too." The wolves' hackles rippled. They stepped forward a pace, as if eager to sink their fangs into horse flesh. The men looked at one another. Then, without a word, they turned their horses and fled. Snow fountained behind them. One dropped his broken sword in his haste. Another's foot slipped from the stirrup. None of them looked back. When the sound of their retreat had faded into the trees, Robb sagged. His knees hit the snow. He stared at his hands. Blood and sap smeared them both, red and dark. The cuts from the sword blade had already begun to close before his eyes, knitting into pale, unblemished skin. The wolves padded back to him. The limping one pressed his head against Robb's shoulder with a soft woof. The warm weight grounded him. He found himself laughing. It was not a sane sound. It bubbled up from somewhere too deep, edged in hysteria. But there was something like wild joy in it too, fierce and sharp. He was not at the twins. He was not on a cold hall floor with his mother's screams ringing in his ears. He was in the wolfswood, beneath a heart tree, with wolves at his side and his enemies riding away in terror. Alive, or something like it. "Well," he told the wolves hoarsely, "looks like the north will hear I've come back from the grave by sunset." They stared at him with level yellow eyes, as if to say, "Of course. What else did you expect?" He sobered slowly. The old god's bargain weighed on his shoulders like a new cloak, heavy and stiff. Every kill feeds the trees. He looked at the crushed Bolton man's corpse. The snow around it was not yet red. It would be soon. His foot had done that almost without his meaning to. The trees had drunk. "Is this what you want?" he asked the heart tree harshly. "Slaughter? Blood? Do you care who dies, so long as the roots drink deep?" The face in the bark did not answer. Its eyes watched, calm and implacable. Somewhere deep, in the place where roots and wolf and man tangled, there was an emotion that might have been amusement. "You are the one who agreed." The whisper came, thin as the sigh of needles in wind. "Our justice is slow. Yours need not be." He clenched his jaw. Fury flared, then cooled. "I'll give you Bolton blood and Fry blood," he said. "I'll give you those who broke bread with me and stabbed me for it. But I'll not start killing anyone who looks at me crooked. Do you hear? I'm not your knife." No answer. Only the slow fall of sap. He pushed himself to his feet. The wolves watched him. It would be so easy to sink into them, to run on 4 legs instead of 2, to let the snow fly beneath his paws and the wind comb his fur. To stop thinking. He couldn't. Not yet. There were other things to do, like finding something to wear. The wolves led him, without his asking, to a half-collapsed hunter's lean-to not far from the clearing. It was little more than branches piled against a fallen log, half buried in snow. Inside, under a crust of frost, were the rotted remains of a cloak and a pair of boots, cracked and stiff. The boots fell apart when he tried to pull them on. The cloak fared better. He wrapped it around his shoulders, grimacing at the smell of mildew. It was better than nothing, barely. When he stepped out of the lean-to, the wolves were waiting, tails fanning. They had a deer with them now, a young doe their teeth had opened at the throat. Steam rose from the carcass. The smell made his stomach growl. He hadn't thought he could be hungry. He was wrong. The wolves tore into the deer without ceremony, ripping flesh and crunching bone. One dragged a haunch toward him and dropped it at his feet. It sat back on its haunches, tongue lolling, looking up at him with something like expectation. Robb stared at the meat. It dripped, bright red on snow. He had eaten like this before in dreams through gray wind. In those dreams, raw meat had tasted like the finest roast his mother's cooks could prepare. His new body remembered. He bent, picked up the haunch and tore a mouthful free. The taste flooded his senses. Blood slicked his tongue, warm and salty. The meat was tough, but each bite filled him with a heat that spread down his limbs. He ate faster than he meant to, ripping and chewing, growls rumbling in his chest that did not sound entirely human. When the haunch was gone, he licked his fingers clean. Only then did he realize what he'd done. He sat back hard in the snow, breathing fast. "I'm still me," he told himself, voice rough. "I'm still Robb Stark." The wolves only yawned. He rose, wiped his hands on the tattered cloak, and looked north. He knew where Winterfell lay. His bones knew. The trees whispered of it. The wolves could find it blindfolded. A thread tugged in his chest every time he turned in that direction. A yearning as sharp as any hunger. Home. It might not be much of one anymore. From the glimpses the old gods had shown him, he knew the castle was burned and taken. The Boltons sat where his father had sat. But stones could be rebuilt. Banners could be torn down and new ones raised. Family, though. He did not know who was still alive, aside from Sansa, whose marriage to a lion was common gossip even in the camps before he died, and Arya, who had vanished like smoke. Bran and Rickon, they said, had been killed by Theon Greyjoy's treachery, though something in him had never quite believed that. Jon Snow was at the wall if he still lived. He had failed them all. He could fail them again by doing nothing. Or he could try to make it right. The wolves padded closer, their flanks brushing his legs. "Come on, then," he said softly. "Let's go see what they've done to our home." He started walking. The wolfswood swallowed him and his wolves without a trace. Word of what the Bolton riders had seen in the Hearttree clearing spread faster than he could travel. In a crofter's hut 3 miles from Winterfell, a boy of 10 with ears too big for his head heard his father mutter to his mother that Mad Jory from the Woodwatch had come babbling of a naked ghost king with wolves at his heels. In Molestown, a whore with a scar down her thigh listened to a deserter from the Dreadfort swear on the stranger's black balls that he'd seen the young wolf himself crush a man's chest like an eggshell. In a smoky hall in White Harbor, where Lord Manderley brooded over pies and letters, a fisherman from a village up the White Knife told of strange howls in the night that set his teeth on edge and made his guts tremble with something that wasn't quite fear. The North was full of stories. It always had been. Old Nan's tales had to live somewhere after the old woman died. Men laughed, but they listened. They listened because winter was coming, and the nights were long, and the Boltons' rule sat ill on their shoulders. At the wall, Jon Snow came upright in his bed with a gasp, heart pounding. For a moment he didn't know where he was. The room was black as a crow's wing, the only light the faint blue wash coming through the slit of a window. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. His breath made ghosts in the air. Ghost lay on the floor beside his bed, massive head on his paws, red eyes half open. The direwolf stared at him, ears pricked. Jon pressed a hand to his chest, gulping air. His skin was slick with sweat, despite the cold. His heartbeat drummed against his ribs as if trying to escape. He'd been dreaming again, not of flying this time or of weirwood faces, of wolves, of one wolf in particular. Grey Wind had stood on the battlements of Winterfell in the dream, larger than Jon remembered, hackles up. Blood drenched his muzzle. His eyes were wild, yellow shot through with gray. When he turned his head, his shadow was a man's shadow wearing a crown of bones. "Robb," Jon whispered. Ghost's ears twitched. His tail thumped once. The dream had felt real, too real, like the ones where Jon saw through Ghost's eyes, smelling and hearing and feeling the world as the direwolf did. Like the ones where he stood in the Godswood and felt the trees watching him. He swung his legs off the bed, feet hitting cold stone. The chill bit up through his soles, sharp and clean, grounding. He padded to the window and shoved the shutters open. The wall loomed beyond, a pale ribbon under the thin moon. The wind struck him in the face like a slap, stealing his breath. The night was clear. Stars pricked the sky. Somewhere far to the south, unseen, the forests that filled the dreams of wolves stood black and endless. "He's dead," John told the night. His voice vanished into the wind. "Robb's dead." He had felt it when it happened. Not as sharply as he felt Ghost's moods, but enough. A tearing, a sudden absence, like a door slamming shut in the middle of a sentence. The news had come weeks later, in a raven's harsh voice. Robb slain at the twins, betrayed at a wedding feast. The Red Wedding, they called it now, in whispers that reached even the wall. Ghost rose and came to stand beside him, shoulder pressing against John's hip. Together they looked out into the dark. For a heartbeat, John thought he heard other howls, distant under the wind. Not Ghost's voice. Not the wolves that ranged beyond the wall. Different. Old. He closed the shutter. "Go back to sleep," he told Ghost. "We've enough to worry about without chasing ghosts." Ghost snorted, unconvinced, and lay down again. His red eyes glowed a while longer in the dark before he closed them. John lay down too, but sleep came slowly. When it did, he dreamed of heart trees and snow and a brother whose shadow had grown teeth. South of the wall, the man that brother had become kept walking. Each day he learned something new about his Direwolf King curse. He learned that he could go longer without sleep than he ever had in life. Days went by with no more than a few hours doze under a pine. Wolves curled around him like living furs. When he closed his eyes, he did not so much sleep as sink sideways, slipping into the wolves' skins, running with them through the forest. They hunted for him even when he walked on two legs, their keen noses finding him rabbits and the occasional deer. He learned that his wounds healed fast. He cut his palm on a broken branch and watched the blood bead, then stop, the skin knitting together. He pushed his body harder than he'd ever pushed it in training, running until a man would have collapsed. His breath came steady. When his muscles burned, the pain soon faded, leaving only a hollow restlessness. He learned that the trees were never entirely quiet. Even when the wind was still, even when the leaves hung heavy with snow, he could feel the slow, patient awareness that threaded through their roots like a second kind of life. It wasn't thought, not as men thought, but it wasn't nothing. It was memory and hunger and an endless, implacable waiting. They whispered sometimes, in a language that was more feeling than word. They did not speak often. When they did, it was to nudge him. Left here when a Bolton patrol lay in wait on the right. Wait, when his hand itched for his sword and the man in his path was only a crofter with a sack of turnips on his back. Now, when a Fry outrider rode too close to the Treeline, easy meat. He did not need them to tell him when it came to phrase. The first time he saw the twin towers of Lord Walder's bridge again, he tasted bile and sap at once. He had not meant to come so far south, not yet. The pull of Winterfell tugged him north like a lodestone. But the trees had their suggestion, and the wolves had their noses, and somehow his wandering path curved toward the river. He stood on a low hill among bare-branched oaks and looked down. The twins sat squat and ugly on either side of the green fork, joined by their stone bridge like hands clasped around a throat. Banners flew from their towers. Fry colors, pale gray and blue, flapping in a wind that smelled of water and old stone and men. From this distance, the hall where he died was just a shape. His heart beat faster anyway. The wolves prowled restlessly at his feet. Their hackles had risen without him willing it. They didn't like the smell of the place any more than he did. It reeked of old blood and broken oaths. He should have turned away. Winterfell needed him. The North needed him. Roose Bolton sat in his father's chair. Yet the sight of the twins stirred something so black and deep in him that turning his back on it felt like leaving a sword in an enemy's hand. The old gods did not speak. They did not have to. The roots that fed their awareness twined through the earth beneath his feet, down and down toward the river. They remembered the taste of his blood in that hall. The memory burned. The wind shifted. He smelled horses, sweat, fear. On the east bank, a line of men in Fry colors was forming. Not many, 50 maybe, enough to escort someone important, not enough for a battle. At their head, a man in better armor than most turned his horse to look back at the castle. Even at this distance, Robb could see his pale, pointed face, his hair the dusty brown of old straw. Edwin Fry. Robb's fingers clenched in the cloak. He could have left it, could have turned and walked into the trees and never looked back. Instead, he whistled. The sound cut through the cold air. The wolves lifted their heads, ears pricked. They looked at him, then at the Fry column, then back. "We should be going north," he told them. His voice was calm. His heart was not. "But perhaps we can prune a few branches on our way." The limp wolf gave a soft bark, as if in agreement. The roots stirred underfoot, the earth subtle as breath. He went down the hill like winter. The Freys did not see him until he was among them. Later, those who survived would swear that the wolves came first. A gray tide pouring from the treeline, eyes red as coals, teeth white as broken moonlight. They would say that a blizzard seemed to rise out of nowhere, snow whipping around them so thick they could not see their hands in front of their faces. They would say that something howled that was not a wolf and not a man, and that the sound froze their piss in their bladders. Robb only remembered how easy it was. He hit the outer edge of the column like a hammer, dragging one man from his saddle, snapping his neck before the others fully registered the threat. A horse screamed as a wolf leapt at its throat. Men shouted, swords ringing from scabbards, but they were clumsy, turning their mounts in too little space, blades flashing at empty air. He moved through them with a speed that felt almost obscene. Steel bit his skin, he barely noticed. He twisted away from a spear, grabbed its shaft, and wrenched it from the man's hands, reversing it and driving it through his belly. A sword came for his neck. He ducked, feeling the air stir over his head, then surged up inside its guard, smashing his palm into the man's jaw. Bone crunched, teeth flew. The man sagged, dead weight. Once, he'd fought like this with gray wind at his side, trusting the direwolf to guard his blind spots. Now the wolves flowed around him as if guided by a shared mind. They took down horses whose riders raised bows, hamstrung men who tried to flee, drove stragglers back into the killing ground. He went looking for Edwin. He found him near the riverbank, his horse half-reared, eyes rolling. The man's pale face was even paler now, spattered with other men's blood. His sword shook in his hand. When he saw Robb step from the whirling snow, the sword stopped shaking. His fingers went limp. The blade dropped with a soft thud into the drift. "You," Edwin whispered. Robb smiled. "Me," he agreed. Edwin's lips worked. You're dead." "We, Walder." "You were there," Robb said. "You watched." Edwin swallowed. A drop of snot hung from his nose, trembling. "Guessed right," he blurted, almost defensively. "You broke it first. You married the Westerling girl." "You!" Robb moved. His hand closed around Edwin's throat and lifted. The man's feet kicked futilely in the air. His fingers clawed at Robb's wrist. His face went red, then purple. His eyes bulged. Robb watched him impassively. The wolves tore down the last of the Fry outriders behind him. Men screamed, then were abruptly silent. The snow drank. Oathbreakers, betrayers. The roots will remember. "I remember," Robb said. "That'll do." He turned his back on the twins. Smoke rose from their chimneys, pale against the gray sky. He could feel eyes on him from the battlements, archers who had watched the ambush, too afraid to loose for fear the wolves would turn on them. He let them watch. There would be other reckonings. Walder Free would not die this day. Perhaps that was wise. Let him sit in his hall and hear servants whisper of a dead king walking the winter woods. Let fear gnaw him thin. He walked north, wolves at his heels, leaving the slaughter behind. As he went, the trees hummed, sated for the moment. In the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton received the report of the Hearttree encounter with his customary lack of visible emotion. The man who brought it stood stiff-backed in the hall, his cloak damp with melted snow. Bits of straw clung to his boots. He had the look of someone who'd ridden hard and then harder, outpacing even his fear. A naked man beneath the heart tree, Roos repeated, when the soldier had finished. His pale eyes gave nothing away. Wolves at his feet. He took your sword with his bare hand and broke it, then crushed Lord Harlan's chest without effort. Yes, my lord, the man croaked. His throat worked as he swallowed. I swear it on the Dreadfort stones, on Ammon hide. A ghost, suggested one of the Leal Dreadfort men, standing by the column. He hid his smirk poorly. The young wolf, come back for your hide at last, lord? A few men laughed, too loudly. Roos did not. A ghost, he said. His tone was mild. From the look of you, Bolton, if he's a ghost who can break swords and crush ribs. Would you care to test whether your mail turns a spirit's fingers aside? The smirk vanished. No, my lord. Roos's gaze returned to the messenger. Did he give a name? The man licked his lips. He said to tell you the boy you killed for a lion's thanks is walking your woods. And he is coming home. Silence fell around those words like snow. Ramsay Snow, lounging in their father's chair with one leg thrown over an arm, snorted. A wildling trick, he declared. His grin was too wide, showing too many teeth. Some skin changer with more knack than sense. They smell the fear in these woods now and think they'll play at being kings for a night. Roos's eyes shifted to his bastard. Skin changers do not grow from southern soil, he said, and our wolves are smaller than the Starks. A mummer, then? Ramsay waved a hand. Or a handful of them, with a lordling's bastard son wearing a wolf pelt. I've killed pretenders before. He had. The people pulled from their hovels and flayed for sport knew that. Roos's fingers drummed once on the arm of his chair. Perhaps, he said. He thought of the Stark boy he'd stabbed at the twins. The warmth of his heart's blood on Roos's hand had been a small thing, barely enough to raise the temperature of the dagger for a heartbeat. The boy had looked surprised, more than anything. Betrayal usually did that. He thought of the stories that had trickled down from the wolfswood in recent weeks. Cattle found torn apart, the carcasses not eaten. Fry men vanishing on patrol, their horses returning riderless, eyes rolling. A hunter claiming to have seen a man with a wolf's shadow standing under the boughs of a heart tree. The north had always been full of tales. Dead men walking, ghosts of the kings of winter in the snows, wolves whose eyes glowed like coals. Roos had never been much moved by them. Men were enough to fear. Still, send more men to watch the woods, he said at last. Not phrase, ours. Men who know a trick from a threat. Have them move in pairs and threes. If they see this ghost king, they are not to engage. They are to watch and report. Ramsay's grin soured. We should hunt him, father, he protested. Drive him into a corner and skin him for a cloak. Let the north see what becomes of ghosts who play at kings. Roos's eyes cooled a fraction more. You will do as I say. They measured each other a moment. Then Ramsay dipped his head, smile slipping back into place. As you say, father. When the meeting broke, when the messenger had been sent away to eat and the hall had emptied of leal men and sycophants, Roos went alone to the Dreadfort's own small godswood. The heart tree there was a stunted thing, its trunk twisted, its carved face crude. The Boltons had never put much stock in the old gods. They had their own ways of dealing with the dead. Snow lay thin on the roots. Roos stood before it, his breath a faint mist in the cold. Is he yours? He asked softly. The wind creaked a branch. Somewhere a raven croaked. If he is, Roos went on, you chose poorly when you set him in my path. He lost his war, your young wolf. His head was too full of songs. He broke oaths and thought himself noble for it. He died like a fool. The tree bled sap sluggishly from its carved eyes. If he's yours, Roos said, and you've sent him back with claws this time, then I'll kill him again. He stepped back. For my own part, he murmured, I'd prefer he's some mummer in a wolfskin and not whatever you've made of him. Men I can flay. Gods are untidy. The tree watched him leave with wooden patience. North, in the wolfswood, Robb felt a prickle run down his spine. He paused with one hand on a spruce trunk, head cocked. The wolves shifted, uneasy, sensing his tension. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard someone speaking his name in a hall he did not know. The sensation faded like breath on glass. He shook it off. There would be time enough to think about Roose Bolton when he drew nearer the Dreadfort and to Winterfell. For now, there were other threads tugging at him. One of them led south and east, to the Riverlands, where his mother's rage burned like banked coals in the dark. Perhaps, when he'd steadied his own steps, he would seek that out. Stone and roots and fire gods' miracles tangled in her. Whatever Catelyn Stark had become, she did not rest easy. Neither did the men she hanged. Another thread led north and a little west of Winterfell, to White Harbor and the fat lord who sat there, cunning eyes hidden behind jest and jowl. Wyman Manderly owed the Starks much. He had lost a son to their cause. He licked Lannister boots now, or so the tales said, but Robb did not believe it entirely. Manderlys were not made for bending, and always the strongest pull led straight to the ruins of his home. He crested a rise one evening and saw Winterfell. The sight drove the breath from him more surely than Bolton's dagger had. Smoke curled from only a few chimneys. The great gray walls were blackened in places, sections collapsed. The broken towers jutted up like rotten teeth. Snow lay thick on the battlements, untrodden in places where once guards had paced night and day. The Godswood's tops rose beyond the walls, bare branches scratching at the sky. He felt its heart tree's awareness brush his mind, a flicker of recognition. Home, the wolves seemed to say without words. Their tails lifted, their ears pricked. Robb stood in the snow, cloak wrapped around his nakedness, yellow flecks glinting in his gray eyes. The Direwolf King curse throbbed in his veins like a second heart. "I'm coming," he whispered to the castle T. Oh, whatever part of his family still breathed within its walls, to the memory of his father walking those ramparts with a boy of 14 at his side. "Wait for me." He set his feet on the road to Winterfell and walked, wolves padding silently at his heels, the tree's slow, relentless awareness watching from every side.